All right, guys, happy Thursday, week 4 of the college football season. I'm Simone Eli alongside Patrick Greenfield. Welcome into BamaNews. Patrick, I don't know about you, but I woke up this morning, walked the dogs. It feels like fall in Alabama, and it's fantastic football weather. So I just wanted to briefly talk about that. I'm very excited.
I am loving the cool weather. I'm really hoping for the first freeze to kill a lot of the insects that have grown out of our
be nice
copious amounts of rain that we've had. I got stung in the face the other day by a yellow jacket. Whoa. So been trying to kill those all morning.
Wow, that's I was not expecting that. Well, you look good. You look good,
Thank
Patrick.
You.
And we are rolling into week 4 of the college football season. Alabama, kind of a tune-up this week against Southern Miss before jumping back into SEC play. We want to bring in Mike Rodak, Bama beat writer for AL.com, to kind of talk about not so much Southern Miss, but this Bama team coming off a huge win at the Swamp, one that there were some complaints about, at least from the fan base. But overall, it seems as though Nick Saban was relatively pleased, smiling on the sideline after the game. And at the end of the day, I mean, a win is a win against what was pretty much a top 10 team in Florida, Mike.
Yeah, sort of mixed messages from him. I mean, he said before the Florida game they had a good week of practice. I think he was in a pretty good mood after they won. Even Monday when he had his start of the week press conference, he seemed pretty relaxed. And then he came out Wednesday and was kind of more of a typical, the bark that we hear from Saban sometimes. So it's hard to exactly get a good read of where he feels this team is because, again, there's some mixed messages there. But I think overall, I think Lane Kiffin put it yesterday pretty well. And, Lane, I think, has some ulterior motives, but he said, you went on the road against the top 10, top 11 team with a first-year starter at quarterback, and you won.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's true, but I think we can all see what the problems are with this team, and they're on both sides of the ball. Mm-hmm. Nick Saban can see what the problems are. Like, there's definitely issues here. Sure. And I think he's looking forward to what's coming up after this week in the Ole Miss game and the Texas A&M game on the road.
Yeah.
And that's, they have a chance to lose those games if they play the way that they've played for a good portion of these first 3 games.
And we're going to get more into breaking down that game in just a moment. But Patrick, we were talking earlier this morning and yesterday about Saban's press conference from Wednesday nights, which have gone from being in past years, something that we just kind of, routine thing. You show up, he talks for about 7 minutes, he leaves, doesn't say a whole lot. But last night, Saban was on one a little bit, had no mixed messages for the media when it comes to when he was asked about Jaleel Billingsley. Here's what he had to say.
What has Jaleel Billingsley proven to you to see his role increased as the season's moved on?
Well, he's doing what he's supposed to do. He practices better. He's more engaged. He's more focused on what he's supposed to do, and he's having more positive performance on the field, which is what any player is supposed to do. I think that did any of you play sports? I mean, the coach is supposed to play the best players, right? And then it's up to the players to do what they're supposed to do so they get to play because they become one of the best players. So that's what he's doing now. But I don't know, maybe if you didn't play, maybe that's not something that you quite get.
I, for one, did play sports. I did play sports. I don't know if Casagrande played sports.
Casagrande said he did play sports.
Like so, what?
I don't know what the sport was, but on Twitter he said he did.
Anyway, that was Saban's response, Patrick. Your initial thought process. I mean, Saban, as we know, can kind of light a fire when he wants to. He goes on these tangents of things that he kind of already has in his hip pocket that he wants to say in press conferences, but this one seemed a little entertaining.
I think, when the topic is just Jaleel Billingsley, that's obviously what we were talking about, a first-round draft pick. He's having his coming-of-age moment, and it's not easy. But if you talk about the whole offense, this is like the residue of when you lose 8 first-round draft picks over 2 years, and you just don't have the leadership, and you don't have the cohesiveness. And I think that's what you saw a little bit from Florida or in the Florida game. But also with Jaleel Billingsley is all these dudes are trying to come together, and you don't have Mac Jones there. You don't have Najee to feed you some information or help you along. And that's really what that is.
Yeah, Mike, for you, just your initial thoughts coming from Nick Saban, having a little bit of a moment there with the media.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask that question 9 times out of 10, he probably gives a more relaxed answer. I think there was just something a little bit off with him last night. And it was even before – I mean, that question came later in the 8 minutes or whatever it was the first question that actually set him off, which was basically asking, which was pretty, innocent too, asking why Trey Sanders didn't really play at Florida. And then Saban kind of got into, well, we just play the best players, and Brian Robinson and Jace McClellan were doing fine, and we didn't have any plan not to play Trey Sanders, and that's sort of what got him going. Yeah. And then for some reason, when he got asked this question about Jaleel Billingsley, which I think was perfectly fine of a question, then it set him off. But even in the morning, yesterday morning, he had his SEC teleconference, and he was 2 or 3 minutes late to it, which is unusual, not unprecedented, but unusual. And then they cut it off after like 4 minutes, which was strange. I've never seen that happen before. So just a little bit off. Something was off with him yesterday. And usually when he gets into those rants, shall we call them, it's usually trying to send a message to his players. I don't know if there was really a message to his players.
It's almost for the media.
Right. It was just something that he was annoyed with elsewhere, and it kind of trickled over into what we were doing. For whatever.
And I'm not in the building, but there must be a small culture issue happening. And like I said, that's the residue of having all these guys leave for the NFL draft in the last few years. So,
or maybe
Alabama is lucky that there's kind of a reset happening with a lot of college football teams. They might be in a little bit more trouble.
Who knows? I mean, it could have been anything. It could be some huge culture issue or something going on in the locker room, or it could be simply his little Debbies were not restocked.
Just even stepping down from that level of the 2020 and the 2019, just that little step down, and that might irritate Saban, who strives for greatness.
Right, and we're 3 weeks into the season now. Almost 4 weeks. That's a third of the way through the regular season, and the team doesn't seem like it's fully practicing or playing the way that he wants. And you get to a certain point, and it may never happen. So it's a question of how far can you get this team to go. And look, I'll say this: maybe we'll get into it later, but Will Anderson, I thought really had some strong comments on Monday when he was saying that we need to watch more film and we need to get back to the standard. And then Saban actually complimented him last night, saying that he's the sort of player we want. But then I asked Cameron Latu and Slade Bolden about the offense struggling on Saturday in Florida, and they basically said, well, we hit some adversity. And I think Latu said there's scholarship players on the other side of the ball, and just a little bit of a difference in answers and mentality you could see there. I think Will Anderson was really trying to lock in and say to his teammates, we need to do better. Yeah, sure. And to be honest, I think there is some excuse making going on with the offense.
Interesting. Well, I think that's all interesting topics there. And Jan Sports here says maybe Mysterio put them in check. Hey, you never know. Some people have bad days at home and they bring them to work with them, or it could be a situation like we're seeing here, like Mike and Patrick just talked about when it comes to cultural things, getting guys on the same page on that. And that happens, when you have guys leave, older guys leave, young guys come in, and kind of teaching them what the expectation is, what the standard is. And one thing going off of that, guys, is SEC environments. I think Nick Saban knows what it takes to win in difficult SEC environments. And he knows that what they experience in Gainesville is only going to continue when they jump back into SEC play and have to go on the road. You talked about Texas A&M, 100,000 strong, Kyle Field, Mississippi State. Everywhere that Bama travels is going to bring a large crowd to these away games. And it's going to be difficult to play in. Saban knows that. He also knows that he has young guys who haven't experienced that, whether it's because they're young, whether it's because last year was a much different situation with smaller crowds. Patrick, I want to start with you. Just your thoughts on, there were some communication issues between Bryce Young, the offensive line there in the Swamp. Saban talked about that. Overall, was pleased with Young's performance, but we did see some penalty issues in the Swamp due to the crowd noise.
Yeah, that's one of the craziest environments Alabama's faced in the last 2 years, really since the 2019 Iron Bowl. Yeah. Obviously, they silenced the crowd for the first quarter, but after Florida, I think I saw it on the broadcast, once Florida got up to speed with Alabama's, they were like, we're the same athletes. Yeah. Then the game started to change. Florida was able to get into, their run option a little bit more. And it was really a game of the first quarter versus quarters 2 and 3. And I got the stats we can show while Mike's talking about it.
Yeah, I covered the NFL for 9 years, and I'd say most of the NFL press boxes are indoors, or all of the outdoor stadiums have indoor press boxes. Some of the domes have been, open air press boxes. And so I don't really have a good reference point for crowd noise because usually I can't hear it. But this was an outdoor press box where you could hear everything, and it's the loudest game that I've covered. Especially, I would say the first drive, and then later on, once Florida came back and Alabama needed to drive down basically to maintain their lead. That was when it's also got really loud. And I'll say this, they handled those two parts of the game really well. I mean, they came out of the gate when it was the loudest and they scored 3 times in a row. And then at the end of the game, when they needed to keep the ball, they kept the ball when it was loud. So as much as there were those penalties and issues with the crowd noise here and there, the worst part of the game was actually when the offense sort of took the crowd out of it in the second quarter. And then they went 3 and out 3 times in a row. So to me, they did really well with the crowd noise. And, they might get some of it at Kyle Field. I don't know, at Mississippi State, how much that will be a environment.
Cowbells, man,
But this is probably the loudest crowd that they're going to hear all year, coupled with just the weather, the humidity, the stickiness of the day.
I was going to add, he said that the team kind of lost focus. They needed to play with intensity the entire time, and that's hard with a young group. And I think with the mugginess, the endurance, it's kind of like a golf game. And you start off really well, but you get to hole 15 on a hot day. You start losing your focus. You start hitting in the bunker. And, also I think when, Tom Petty started playing and you're losing, that probably excited a lot of people out there. So
Bama, goes up 21-0. And I love that you broke this down the way you did, Patrick. Look at the stats from second quarter to the fourth quarter. Bama just straight up outplayed. And one of the main issues, I guess, that Saban addressed, and one that's kind of glaring on the stat sheet, is the rush defense, the run defense there by Alabama, giving up 245 total for the game, but 200 yards. And I think, Mike, you've covered enough football at every single level to know that if you are not successful on that side of the ball when it comes to stopping the run, especially in the SEC, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, and look, this Alabama defense has changed over the years where now it's built to stop the pass because that's what they needed to stop last year against Florida with the offense they had last year and some of the other teams that have come in lately. It's built to have 5 defensive backs on the field. It's built with these 2 smaller, faster inside linebackers and Christian Harris and Henry To'oTo'o. That's kind of how it's designed, is to stop the pass. And there's only going to be 2 defensive linemen on the field at one time. It's not like 10 years ago where you have 3 300-pound guys up front and these big 260-pound linebackers. And that stopped the run really well back then. So this is kind of the counterpunch where teams like Florida that have a quarterback who can run, who have this option game, are able to kind of come after Alabama. I mean, Ole Miss did the same thing last year when they got 647 total yards. I think 200 and something out of them were rushing yards.
Sure.
So this is just kind of how teams are going to attack them based on how the Alabama defense is built, and you got to stop it. You got to be able to stop the run when you have smaller guys on the field, and they weren't able to do that on Saturday.
Patrick, I think they were able to see some, I'm not sure if weaknesses is the right words, but I think that Rodak made a good point, is that this defense is built to maybe stop more of a passing attack. But good offensive coordinators recognize that, and they can recognize where there maybe are stronger points in this Bama defense where they can maybe exploit it a little bit. And it seemed like the ground game was really working for Florida. I mean, 4 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, that was pretty telling. There were times where it seemed like Bama was just getting gashed.
Yeah, and Nick Saban said, Michael asked him if there was any schematically things that were wrong with the defense. He just said they didn't execute. It's actually really interesting because one stat is Florida's 6 point yard average was the highest allowed by Alabama since the Ohio State college football loss in the Sugar Bowl. But I'll say, if you go back and watch the 2-point conversion, Dan Mullen admitted that they didn't run the play correctly. And Emory Jones kind of holding the ball on the RPO. He let Malik Davis kind of get sacked right up the middle. They were really close. If they didn't mess that up, it would have been a tie game, and it would have been overtime, and Alabama might not have survived.
The momentum was not with the Tide at that point. If I was
some people don't believe in momentum,
some people don't, but they should, especially in that environment. The momentum was clearly shifted there in the second through fourth quarter, so I would absolutely be believing in the momentum at that point had this game actually gone into overtime, Mike.
Yeah, I've always, I don't know which side of that debate I come down on, because I think each play is an individual play, and if you get gashed in the first 9 plays of a drive, but you stop them at the 10th, then, what good is momentum there? But yeah, you definitely feel it in the stadium and the crowd getting louder, and Alabama seeming to get more tired. Toe was walking around with his hands on his hips in between every play, and you could sense it. But I mean, it seemed like on Saturday, it was either Will Anderson was blowing up the play in the backfield or Florida was doing something. If they got past him, then they were in pretty good shape.
Well, it'll be interesting to see moving forward. Let's look at the other side of the ball, talking about Bryce Young. There were some criticisms throughout the fan base when it comes to Bryce Young, but Nick Saban overall seemed pleased with his young quarterback, and in my opinion, people should be thrilled with what Bryce Young accomplished when he went on the road in a very tough SEC environment and handled it with guys who he is still kind of learning timing-wise and his cohesiveness when it comes to this offensive line, when it comes to his receiving core. But you look at some of the numbers, and you see the breakdown here. But overall, 240 yards, 3 touchdown passes, not a ton of mistakes. There were some moments where it felt like Young could maybe have run the ball, rather than throw the ball. And, decision-making is maybe a question there. The guy likes to stay in the pocket. I mean, he just likes to look downfield and keep that an option, Mike. But in my opinion, I think that there is some unnecessary criticism of Bryce Young at this point in his career when it comes to fan base.
Yeah, and I mean, Nick Saban's been very complimentary of him. I don't think he said a negative word about Bryce Young this entire year, ever since he, set foot in spring practice back in March. So I'll take Nick at his word on that one. In that he doesn't really have a problem with what's going on with Bryce. And I think there's really not a whole lot there to criticize. I mean, he's thrown 122 straight passes now without an interception, which is longer than Tua and Mac went before they threw their first. I mean, he's really taking care of the ball, but he's tied for fourth in the country, I think, in touchdown passes. And I think he's doing his part. I know people kind of want him to run here and there, and maybe there's a couple plays, but if you read the scouting report of him coming out of high school, this kid is a passer. He's not a running quarterback. I mean, that's not his game. And he's a very good passer. And I think if you kind of listen to Nick Saban, he's going to shift the blame a little bit more to the receivers. And that's fair. I mean, I think they need to get more out of John Mechie. I think they need more consistency out of Jameson Williams. I think they've gotten very little out of Slade Bolden. Then you add the drop in the end zone on top of that. So it seems like we're at the point where they're going to continue to play JoJo Earl more, the freshman, and Nick Saban just talked about it last night with Ajay Hall potentially getting more playing time going forward. And I think they're going to try to find some guys who are explosive and can kind of give this offense what it had the last few years. And they have the talent. They should have the talent. I mean, they're 5-star kids coming in, but there's just something missing there at wide receiver right now.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think I personally think this was Bryce Young's kind of coming of age game. Craziest environment he's been in. It showed he can handle the crowd, showed he could handle the heat, the weather. If you believe in momentum, he could handle that. And he could handle it when his team was struggling. I guess that's part of the momentum. Another interesting part was the Brian Robinson third quarter touchdown, or his walk-in. They were talking about how his height kind of affects that, because when you had Tua or Mac Jones, you're able to kind of lunge in there on that 1 yard line. And, Bryce has to have a different kind of game. If you remember the phone booth fake that he got to Latu, that was another kind of play that you weren't going to see from other quarterbacks. So I really think this sets him up for success in SEC play. I'm really excited to see him against Ole Miss.
Yeah, he's just to cut in there. He's a small quarterback too. So I think people who want him to be running out on the edges and banging into people or, QB sneaks, like that's hard to see that being part of his game.
Yeah.
So can I add one thing?
Yeah.
We're talking about playing the best players. I would have loved to see JoJo Earl in there a little bit more. He only had 1 reception for 18 yards. Slade had 3, including 1 on the first play, and he had the drop. If you're going to play the best players, I'd love to see JoJo Earl in the slot a little bit more.
You call up Bill O'Brien, you let me know what he says. All right, guys. Alabama will be at home Saturday, 6:30 against Southern Miss. First night game at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Should feel pretty cool. And honestly, I think night games at Bryant-Denny have just gotten even more impressive with the lighting. I mean, I don't have to have some big topic discussion about this, but guys, that atmosphere is awesome. I mean, it's been a minute since I've been able to actually see it because of the situations with going to games last year and all of that. But I think that, when it comes to just cool college environments for fans, for players, that's going to be pretty fun one on Saturday.
Yeah, and not to be a Debbie Downer, but it's almost
here we go, Mike. No, I'm just kidding.
It's almost like you wish there'd be more games that are actually competitive, good games in Bryant-Denny Stadium, because I mean, their first 2 games this year, Mercer and Southern Miss, and then they have Mexico State coming in November, and then you look at their first month of their schedule for 2022 that just came out this week, and they have 3 home games, and they're against Utah State, Louisiana, Monroe, and Vanderbilt. And it's like, if I'm paying $200 a ticket to Bryant-Denny Stadium, I want to watch better teams than that.
You're right.
I don't want all these games to be on the road. And it seemed like the college football playoff was discussing some of these home, if they expand the playoff, to have like these home playoff games. But I mean, that whole realignment right now seems to be up in the air.
I mean, obviously Saban agrees with you. And once Oklahoma and Texas get into the SEC, I think you're going to see a little bit of that kind of mashed up a little bit. Obviously the contracts are signed. So, but it is going to be a nice night. And when Dixieland Delight starts playing, that's when you'll be in the right place.
Yeah. Jant Sports tuning in saying, playing Walmart State University. I love that. That's good stuff there. All right, guys, real quick before we kind of change things up slightly on the show and talk recruiting just for a second. Any injury updates, Mike? Anything we got to be keeping an eye on going into this game? I feel like these kind of tune-up games, you always just hope guys stay healthy. You get them in, get them out, and move forward when you get back into SEC play with Ole Miss.
Yeah, Brian Robinson was one that kind of cropped up again last night. I mean, Saban mentioned it after the game that he had bruised ribs against Florida and kind of played through them. And then he mentioned it last night, saying that he was day-to-day. So I could very much envision maybe a very limited role, if any, for Robinson on Saturday night, just to get him healed and ready for the 2 games that come after that.
Yeah.
An Ole Miss and A&M. And we kind of saw that a couple weeks ago when they sat both of the cornerbacks when they probably could have played, but they wanted to kind of keep them out of there. Yeah. I mean, I think Will Anderson probably will play, but that's potentially a guy who you could probably sit if you want to get his knee right in this game. But other than that, I think they should be fine.
All right, good stuff. Guys, we have a little nugget for you here on the show, something we don't really talk about often, but we do a recruiting show. And Patrick went out and saw one of the biggest recruit in the state of Alabama, who is headed for the Tide, head to play for the Tide next year. And it's Jeremiah Alexander out of Thompson High School. Patrick, I know you have some highlights from Jeremiah.
Throw him up.
Yeah. And this is a guy that, fans, I mean, you might get frustrated a little bit with some defense, run attack situation, rush defense from this last week, but this is a guy you can certainly look forward to when it comes to his explosiveness, what he's going to bring to this Tide team in years to come. Patrick, I know it was fun. It was kind of a treat for you to be able to watch this.
Yeah, it was awesome. A great environment. And a lot of, not on that last one, but he's going up against 6'7" Alabama baseball commit Riley Quick. He just has speed, power. He's able to drop back in coverage. It reminds me kind of a Devin White, the LSU linebacker from a few Tampa Bay now. He's just able to kind of be everywhere on the field, especially on the edge. He was lining up right. He's lining up left. He would drop. And this is against a good Hewitt-Trussville team. So Alabama fans should be very excited about this guy.
6 tackles, 2 assists, 5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, 5 quarterback pressures, fumble recovery. Mike, you don't see stats like that very often when it comes to – and this is not, like Patrick said, this is not like Little Sisters of the Poor. This is Hewitt-Trussville. These are 2 teams that are ranked in the top 10 in 7A.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, right now he's their top-ranked prospect, number 11 in the country on 24/7. We've kind of seen that from Alabama the last couple of years, where these edge rushers are really the highest-rated players that they're bringing in.
Yeah,
Will Anderson last year was right up there, and then they brought 2 more in, and Drew Sanders, Chris Braswell. I mean, Quandarius Robinson. It was 4 outside linebackers they brought in last year, and it's kind of where the game's played right now. It's about getting after the passer and. Like we mentioned before, their defense is kind of built to stop the pass. So I'd imagine that they're going to keep recruiting these guys pretty hard and trying to get some of the best in the country.
His ability to run sideline to sideline really stood out more than even his power. Like his ability to be where he wanted to be on the field stood out to me over most things that I saw. So very excited to see him on the Tide.
No doubt about that. Obviously, he's trying to help Thompson to a third straight 7A title. But guys, back here in Tuscaloosa, Bama back home this week, taking on Southern Miss. Kickoff at 6:30 on the SEC Network. A night game at Bryant-Denny. Not sure how long it'll be an actual game that you want to watch, but regardless, it's the atmosphere, Dixieland Delight, all the things. Fans, have fun, stay safe when you go out there, and then Bama back into SEC play against Ole Miss the next week before taking a trip to Texas A&M. So, guys, appreciate you tuning in for episode number 4 of BamaNews. He's Mike Rodak, Patrick Greenfield. I'm Simone Eli. Y'all enjoy the rest of your Thursday and week 4 of the college football